All right, this is Midas versus Delial in the weekly open. Midas's first turn. Let's check the rules. SPRC. Two games on this set have already happened. This is the third first round match being played, but the first one that has been happening at a time I am around for. Uh, I think SPC tends to be a second turn favored rule set. I'm not actually. We can go check past weekly open results. The other ones so far. Yes. We have had 2 wins for second turn, 0 wins for first turn so far, which does support that thesis, but, that thesis is not based on this specific game. Uh, that thesis I would hold on to regardless, but sometimes levels vary it, right? SPC generally is a neutral to second turn favored set, where most sets are first turn neutral to first turn favored. Um, it's often really hard to find a starter. For instance, if you don't have something like one of those 6/6 corners in 9, I think there's a fair chance Midas chucks one of them in 1. But the other cards aren't that happy to see that. 4/7/4/2 and 3/6/3/5. Also, you could imagine 3/6/3/5 landing in 4, but Deli's hand is pretty well set to meet that. It can be, what I'm saying is, it can be difficult to find a starter where you're not playing from behind. And that tends to add up. Now, I think a really important thing given the hands here is just coverage of those 6/6s. So Deli is going to be looking to make sure he has 1/5/7/3 available, and Midas is going to be looking to make sure he has 4/7/4/2 available. I think SPC is a good set. My preference is for all rules, but I think SPC should be there a whole bunch as well. I think if we're ranking rule sets, and level matters and stips matter. This is obviously random, but I would put all rules number 1, and I think I'd put SPC number 2. And I don't want it to always be my favorite thing. I like some variety, so I think SPC is a good and interesting conclusion. One thing about it that's kind of interesting is I think moves in sides become better. Actually, I was asked recently by someone general thoughts about SPC. I'm curious what I said. Maybe I said something interesting. Yes, I am avoiding doing any analysis of first turn. It is annoying to find starters on SPC, and I'm not going to make myself do it. Or I'm going to buy time and try to avoid it. Let's see if I can find what I thought about SPC. All right. The fewer rules, the closer to no rule strats become applicable. Sides become much more relevant with walls taken off, both as starters, the classic defensive side. Imagine Deli didn't have a 7 to the right, left, then 3/6/3/5 and 4 with 4/7/4/2 defending it is much more likely to be safe with plus wall off, right? 2/4/4/7 no longer covers it in 7. It's easier for defensive sides to click and make sense with wall rules off. But also just in general, squares with 2 outfacing sides, right? If the center is occupied, then corners have 2 outfacing sides, and sides also have 2 outfacing sides. The reason corners are often better than the center play is if you look, say there's a card in 5 and a card in 1. A card in 2 interacts with one wall and the card in question, right? And both cards in question. But if there are cards in 2 and 5, a card in 1 interacts with 2 walls and the card in question. So they each interact with 3 things. One, it's a wall and 2 cards. One, it's 2 cards and a wall. But with wall rules off, the 2 walls start being a much less, an unimportant interaction. So suddenly, sides are more likely to have either safety options or difficult for them to take options than corners are with the center occupied. I think that's a really interesting effect that SPC has. I hope I said that in a reasonable way. But basically, side moves in general have a lot of interactions with walls. If you play on a side, any corner next to it is touching 2 walls when they interact with it. Well, if you look at a corner and something tries to attack it, it is only interacting with one wall while it tries to interact with it. It only has one wall to use to help it with plus walls or same walls. So, in a normal game, corners are much easier to build around than side starters. But without wall rules in effect, the main drawback of side moves, that they interact with so many more walls when the opponent chooses how to interact with them, it disappears. And so moves in sides in general become more valuable, and moves in corners become less valuable. Now, I did not actually notice that Midas had safety here, so we should check if Deli has a setup. It's really foolish of me not to notice. It doesn't look to me like Deli has a setup. Huh, how did I miss this? Well, that really shows I wasn't looking for starters. Um, all right, so this might be a more trickier position than normal, but I think SPC again, even when this happens, there's usually resources, but this does look somewhat difficult now. But I'm going to keep reading my list because I'm going to see if I said anything interesting in the hopes that I did. Uh, so yeah, I think sides gain value, and the easiest way to look at this is defensive side starters, but I think it's just true throughout the game. Sides suddenly become a less interactable move than corners are. And normally sides are easier to interact favorably with for the person beating them, and now I think they're harder. Two, I listed my points. Second turn tends to do better with reduced rules, particularly with walls off. I think this is in large part because the more dangerous corner starters are less feasible. In general, starters look more like what starters look like with no rules. Yeah. Um, if you look at win rates in Open, just from events we've run, you can pretty clearly see like center starters have the lowest win rates. This was a very fast move for Deli, which either means he had this in mind or he thinks his position's terrible. I suspect he had this in mind, given that it is in fact safe. For some reason, I noted Midas had to hold on to 4742 to cover Deli's 6-6 corner, but I didn't note he has to cover the 5-7 corner as well. And so, okay, both of these players had this in mind, and I have not had my brain turned on or been remotely useful here. So let's go back to my list, because I have more interesting things to say there clearly than I do about this game. 3. Normal card evaluation changes. Often the best cards in general are with gaps that capture the relevant targets. I.e., if 8 and 7 are the best numbers available, you prioritize gaps of 2 and 3, meaning things like an 8-6 or a 7-4, that there's a 2 gap between an 8 and a 6, or a 3 gap between a 7 and 4, and that means it's going to be able to plus wall 8s and 7s. On SPC, gaps of 0 and 1 become by far the most important, basically regardless of level, right? If you're facing A's and 9s and there's a lot of A's and 9s, then you won't be able to play off walls, but you still can play off the numbers you're seeing. And if the numbers you're seeing are a lot of A's and 9s, then you want things that have 0 gaps, like a 6-6 can hit 2 A's. A 6-7 can hit an A and a 9 if configured correctly. So suddenly, like, for instance, if you were playing with plus wall, a 7-6-4-1, the 4 can play with the 1 and can play with the 7 to hit stuff. But something like a 7-6-2-2 is not used that much. But with same plus combo, 7-6-2-2 might suddenly have more play. I'm not sure this is the case. It might not, but it might, because that 0 gap can be important for hitting the kind of targets you want to hit. Um, with walls off, having max numbers available is more valuable. While some kind of dynamic cards, those with 0 and 1 gaps, think like 8765, has some play even without plus wall, increase in value, the big corner max value stuff increases more. Fewer rules is closer to no rules, but the implication that stuff that's better with fewer rules becomes better is really important. Yeah, So suddenly your big corners play better. I think something really interesting from this was same wall, but from the Kefka finals with Turds and Delial was the hands that were really bad were not the hands. It was hands that had very limited directional capability or like three cards for the same corner. Those were bad hands, but that was not enough to be losing. With so few rules, the hands that were losing, the hands that were really bad and got the players in trouble, were hands where they had some directional issues, but more importantly, didn't have A's on a bunch of their cards. The 5/7/7/9s were just so bad to have in your hand, and the games both players got in trouble were the games where one person had A's on 4 or 5 of the cards and the other person had A's on 2 or fewer. And just the more we take away rules, the more raw power matters. The more we add in rules, the more you can use cards in a variety of ways, and their pure power is not their defining trait. I should make sure this is recording properly. Okay, it is. All right, what else did I say? The final rule set of Kefka is very close to no rules random and cannot be allowed to happen. All right. As plus and plus wall are removed, you stop having any counterplay if your hand sucks. Sure. Okay, my other stuff, yeah, is not about SPC specifically. So those were my thoughts on SPC. I'm not sure how useful they are, but I think, and some of them aren't really relevant to random, like card evaluation has some value in game, right? Because I use this as an example for closed non-combo a lot. You often want to use the weakest card that accomplishes the goals you need. So for instance, Midas last turn, say he had decided, I need to block 6, right? His plan was, I'm blocking 6. I'm going to do something that blocks 6. And I want to block 6 with the highest outfacing number I can so that it's safe, ideally a 5 or higher. Because those are the 3 cards Deli cannot take. And you're going to check for setups as well, so it might be that a 6 is better than a 5 or a 5 is better than a 6. We're not going to be very specific here. But there are 3 cards that accomplish your goal. 6/2/1/6, 6/1/2/6, and 3/6/3/5. Which card do you put there? You put the card there that is the worst going forward, that you evaluate as the least useful card for the rest of the game. So it's easy to see, okay, 3/6/3/5 has a lot more power facing the action. It's a little less redundant. It's a little redundant with our 4/7/4/2, but it's less so. Okay, I think 3/6/3/5 is my best card of those 3 moving forward. In a vacuum, I might evaluate it as the least strong of those cards, but adjusting to the game state, I think that's the best one moving forward. And then 6/2/1/6 versus 6/1/2/6 is kind of close. It kind of ends up being which one do you think's randomly going to spike some plus, or maybe you just think they're the same and it doesn't matter. But you play the card in 6 that you think is the least useful card moving forward that does accomplish what you want to get out of 6. And so I do think a generally useful principle is if there's multiple cards that make sense in a square and accomplish what you're trying to accomplish with a move there, play the one with less value moving forward. And you will often find the solver will be like, there were a bunch of ties here, and they were any card in this square worked, and they're all about equally good. And you go, okay, but this one makes sense and the others don't, because this one gets rid of a card that you don't need, and the others all get rid of a card that's pretty useful. And yes, if you explore further, it turns out that move put more pressure on the opponent, kind of thing. So what point was I trying to make? Trying to make some point about use the weakest card. Yes, card evaluation in games does matter, right? Card evaluation in games is less, it matters less than hand building, but oftentimes if there are cards that accomplish similar goals, you have to make a decision about which one is more valuable moving forward. And that could be based on just the raw strength of that card. Often it will be dependent on which cards are on the board, what direction the game is facing. You'll have to adjust it a bit. You won't just hold on to your A964 over your 8853 because the A964 is better if the A964 only has the 4 and 6 facing the action, right? Stuff can vary. But card evaluation in game certainly has some uses, but mostly card evaluation is for hand building. I think the big takeaway is just sides are much safer squares, or much more difficult to attack squares than they are in a full rules game. There's just, they inherently come with a lot of interaction with walls, and when that disappears, it is just much more difficult to interact with moves in side squares 2, 4, 6, and 8. And that second turn does well. All right, Deli has set up multiple pluses in 5. Now, I think Midas is very good at handling these setups. Midas is very good, for instance. Sometimes, let's assume Midas's position is a little shaky here. I don't know if it is. Let's just assume it is. Midas is good at finding at like when you have to go in 7, give them the plus in 5, and you just tie anyway, right? Like he's good at calculating the line out to the tie, even if the initial move looks unappealing. And that is a real strong skill. I think a lot of people in positions that look unpleasant, they kind of go, okay, go there, but they have this reaction that looks really bad. Okay, what's another move to try? And they will kind of quickly dismiss the standard options, and they'll end up trying to find something weird because they were able to quickly dismiss the standard options, because something looked scary against each of them. But actually, usually a bunch of the standard options do hold, and if you would just check them thoroughly, you'd find it. And I think this is a really frequent mistake, is cutting off calculation early on normal moves, in favor of playing weirder moves. And you can look at those players' games and you'll be like, well, they played this weird move and lost. That seems like it might be the weird move's fault. But it's not so much the weird move's fault. It's not like they wanted to play the weird move. It's that their thought process was too quick to dismiss unappealing normal options. And so unappealing weird options looked better to them. But the point that was an error wasn't quite there. Okay. So blocking 5 is very standard here. 5 is Deli's good square. Sometimes the simplest path, I don't think it's true here, is to go in 2. Because 2 kind of says, I will block 5 next turn, and it will be good for me if I do. And it can often force the opponent to play 5, and that can make a very clear line. I was looking at some game recently. It might have been Yevon Asala for Triad Wars. Okay, indeed, you see Midas go 7, right? Midas has checked the line. He has played the unappealing move that concedes the combo, where Deli will lock in 3 cards, and he has gone, I think I hold there, this is fine. Now, there is the question, does he hold there? And I don't really think he does. So what if Deli goes 4, 5, 5, 3 in 5? If Midas goes in 4, Deli can take from 1, and that card in 1 will be safe, so Deli should win. If Midas goes in 2, Deli can go 1, 5, 7, 3, and 4, and Midas never has combo play against that, so Deli wins. That's an easy one to count. That's a very standard one to count in the long L, right? The long L being the current structure. If you have the capture in 5, you've locked in 3 cards. If you get a double capture on your final turn, and they can only capture the card you double captured with, you just win structurally. And Midas doesn't really have a setup in 1. So this is the kind of move Midas finds. This makes me suspect that Midas was just lost, because I think Midas is very good at defending these positions. But I don't think this was the way. Makes me wonder if just going 6, 1, 2, 6, and 5 was better. Seems like it might have been. Maybe it still loses. Maybe you just, like, lose the count, but... Huh. I mean, I didn't seriously calculate. My guess is 6, 1, 2, 6, and 5 at a better chance. But I think this is over. And will be, notably, another win, if so, for second turn. So that's not to say Midas's task was easy here. I wonder if Midas checked 2, 4, 4, 7, and 5, but not 4, 5, 5, 3. But also there's a very good chance he just blanked on something, which of course we all do. I'm going to head over to the solver because I am curious here if there was a hold. We could try to think about it, but it is hard to look at positions that are passed in our heads. It's hard enough to calculate, normally, and having to hold a position that is not the current position on board is tougher yet. So, just putting in the cards. The Deli has 1, 5, 7, 3, and 1 here. Nice win for Deli. Like, anytime someone wins, having faced a safe starter, like, well done, Even if you had a safe corner in reply, it is one of those things of like, yeah, that's often going to be a dangerous situation. So let us pop open our good friend, the solver. You may look with me. I will grant you that privilege. And I think we just care about this position. Everything looks pretty normal till here. There is a tie. Okay, but it is very hard to find. 5 does not work. 5 dies to 7. Yeah, I had checked 2 and I didn't think it died to 2, but I hadn't checked 7 yet. Setting up that plus in 4 is really rude. And there's the same issue of just anytime you kind of like go for yourself, you can't flip this card. So there was a tie here though. And if you want to pause and try to figure it out, this might be a good practice, but very humanly difficult. I really should have said I'm showing the move now and not ruined it if you hadn't paused yet and thought there might be more to say. Apologies for that. Yeah, that seems very difficult to find. I don't think I would have found this. So there is the question, what about here? If that position was very humanly difficult, is there a more comfortable way to do this? And I'm not going to go in depth on the moves. I'm just going to look at where tying moves were. And the answer is a bunch of options in 6. So 6 held, but again was really difficult. There's an option in 8. There's an option in 7 and an option in 1. But no, 6 is the square with by far the most ties. So Midas played this very principled. I do wonder if that means that this 2, 4, 6, 5, and 3 starter, even though it was safe, was just not the way. And that maybe a Deli, who really likes to hold on to his safe cards, if that he thinks they have play later, keeping that to hold 5, 2, 3, 7 in check, and maybe just playing something like here, something of that ilk. Maybe. Probably this card, right? Because you want to be able to recapture easily, and 4, 7, 4, 2 is an easier time recapturing this one than it does this one. I wonder if that would have been a better way to play. But this just looks like it ended up being very difficult. Deli just played a move that immediately put a lot of pressure on, and this was just not really a humanly savable position for most of us. So really nice win for Deli. It might look kind of simple and straightforward, but that is how the best players win. Is it just all looks clean and easy and just, yeah. And I'll also say I do think this is a second turn favored rule set, and this was, I think, a difficult spot for Midas, even with a safe starter. So well done to Deli. I guess that's all we got for this video. And yeah, I like SPC. I think it's a fun set, and I like having some. One thing I really like about it is I like having some sets in there that are not first turn favored. Right? I think most rule sets do veer first turn, and it's nice to have some that veer second turn. And I don't know what the neutralist of rule sets is. I should probably try to figure that out at some point. Because some levels SPC clearly favors second turn, and some setups I think it's kind of neutral, and I'm not sure which is which. And that might also be the case for first turn losing its advantage on some with all rules. That would be kind of interesting to figure out. what are actually the neutralist rule sets. It's probably mono level, um, but also adding multiple levels tends to favor first turn, right? If you think of like level 1 through 10 random, um, what first turn can do is basically both players are forced to play some low level cards, and if first turn just keeps a high level card, they often have a sweeper at the end. And second turn needs combo potential to do a lot, and it's harder to have combo potential if all the early played cards have low numbers facing out. So I think the more levels there are in the random, the more it favors first turn. Though also it adds a lot of randomness, because of course there is the chance one person just gets a trivially winning hand. But I wonder if, like, say SPC is favored second turn, say like level 6 SPC favors second turn. I wonder if like level 4 and 6 SPC, who does that favor? Probably first turn? What about 5 and 6? Like, is there some point where we can combine levels and create like a truly balanced random rule set of like, yes, this is the one where first and second turn actually have equal chances to win, without it feeling like a crapshoot. Like, if it turned out 110 random was fair, it's fair in the sense that first and second turn win the same amount, but it's not at all fair in the sense of like what it feels like to play it, because half the games you get an extra level 10 or 2, and half the games they get an extra level 10 or 2. Not a half, but a fair chunk of games, and that means the actual games are kind of coin flips to who gets the better random. But I wonder if there's like we can optimize rule sets for just like, yes, this is the fairest rule set where you get first or second turn that really doesn't impact your chances. It will hand by hand, but overall, it's fair. Um, Overall, if someone gets 5 first turns in a row or 5 second turns in a row, we won't go, oh, that person got screwed. They might still get screwed by the random, but they wouldn't be. I should try to work on that at some point. All right, we'll call it there.